JPMorgan Chase is a mega bank. This bank holds over $5 trillion in assets. JPMorgan and Chase are two separate institutions. In the year 2000, JPMorgan acquired Chase, which is a commercial bank. JPMorgan is an investment bank that started in London in 1857. Chase is America's biggest retail bank. That means the money in the Chase Bank is the savings and deposits of 86 million Americans. This is the biggest bank in America. It holds 11% of all US retail deposits. Since acquiring the Chase Bank in a $36 billion acquisition in the year 2000, JP Morgan has become the biggest bank in America. It now holds over $2 trillion of retail deposits, which is your money. An investment bank and a commercial bank are not the same at all. The commercial bank holds your savings and then lends out money. It earns its money charging interest on financial products like loans and mortgages. An investment bank, which is what JP Morgan is, raises capital for governments and corporations. They underwrite nation-scale debt and massive financial mergers. JP Morgan clients are not small businesses, current accounts with loans. Its clients are massive corporations, sovereign governments, and the extremely obscenely wealthy. This distinction matters crucially because when JP Morgan bought the Chase Bank, they got access to the deposits and savings of 86 million Americans. And most people do not understand that their salary paid into the Chase Bank is sitting on the balance sheets of one of the biggest investment banks in the world. And that investment bank is using those salaries as collateral to underwrite fossil fuel exploration and nuclear armament deals. Retail customers at Chase Bank did not sign up for this when they opened a current account. The corporate documents on both sides are adamant that this was a merger between equals. But in reality, what JP Morgan got were the retail deposits of 86 million Americans, a network of branches that was already serving 70% of the US population with convenient and accessible drive-in banking, and this other bank's cleaner history that it could launder as its own. This is the About Us page of the JP Morgan Chase website. This history that starts in 1799 with the Manhattan Company is the history of the Chase Bank. The 200-year history of the Chase Commercial Bank has conveniently absorbed the colonial history of the JP Morgan Investment Bank. And in return, Chase customers got their deposits moved onto the balance sheet that finances fossil fuels, weapons and sovereign debt without their informed consent. No share of the profits that the deposits are helping generate as collateral for JP Morgan Bank. A depreciation in the value of the customer services being provided. The savings rate has not tracked inflation since this bank was bought. And blame for the corrupt decisions of the investment bankers. Now suddenly an attack on them is an attack on the savings of 86 million Americans. So let's start with the history of the right bank firstly. 1857, London. A bank called Peabody, Morgan & Co. is about to collapse. George Peabody, he was the senior partner. And this is Junius Spencer Morgan. He was the junior partner at the bank. I'm going to go full nerd on you now. In 2017, the Bank of England reconstructed its own crisis ledgers from November 1857. The Bank of England had to rescue a list of banking houses who were on the verge of collapse, and Peabody, Morgan & Co. were fourth on the list. They took £800,000. That is nearly £1 billion. I'm using Measureworth's economic share of GDP measure. So if you thought that 2008 was the only time that the banks have ever crashed, this is a regular occurrence. Bailing out these banks required the British state to suspend its own currency laws and print notes that it was legally forbidden from printing. The official line from the Bank of England on why they bailed out these banks was because letting them fail would damage the cotton trade. That omits so much that it is structurally just a lie. It's not even a technical truth anymore, it's structurally just a lie. The bailout wasn't to save the British economy either. Peabody and Morgan were shareholders in the Citizens Bank of Louisiana and Canal Bank. In fact, they had the controlling share in Canal Bank. This was not revealed until JPMorgan's 2024 slavery disclosure to the city of Philadelphia. These are the two southern banks that used to accept enslaved people as collateral for loans. Between 1830 and 1860, these banks accepted 21,000 enslaved people as collateral. When slavers defaulted on their loans, the bank ended up owning people. This information was demanded out of JPMorgan in 2024. Their first response put the figure at 13,000 enslaved people as collateral. They later had to update that figure to 21,000 because of more complete archive work. I suspect that is still an underestimate. The men who ran the Bank of England and the men who ran the British Parliament and the men who ran the bailed out banks were the same men, and they were heavily invested in the transatlantic trade. It was their money, it was their cargo, it was their slaves, it was their gunpowder. They voted to rescue themselves with public credit, and then they voted again to change the laws after the fact to make that rescue legal. Behind me is what Peabody and Morgan had on their books in 1857. You can pause to read. When the Bank of England said it wanted to save the cotton trade, it didn't mean the crop. It meant the financing chain behind it. So, a plantation owner in Mississippi needs cash months before the harvest. He can't wait months. He needs cash now. Maybe he's a gambling addict, I don't know. So he travels into New Orleans to Canal Street to visit one of the counting houses. He tells the clerk, I have 200 bales coming in October, but I need $500 now. So they draft a bill of exchange. This is an IOU. Canal Bank says, we're going to give you the 500 today, but when your cotton is harvest, you have to give us back 520. The bank has given the planter $500, but the risk that the harvest might fail is very real. The bank wants to know that even if the harvest fails, or the ship sinks, or the money never materializes, that they can still collect the value. So they ask him for something as collateral. The easiest way I can explain collateral to you is I once ate a full meal at a restaurant and then looked in my bag and realized I had no purse. My purse was at home about 20 minutes away. So I went to the hostess and said, my purse is at home, it's 20 minutes away. And she said, can you leave your mobile phone? So I leave my phone with her, I run home, I get the money, I come back and I pay. My phone was collateral in case I never came back. So this planter says, I have 50 slaves. And Canal Bank says, cool, we will use that as collateral. The appraisal price of an enslaved person in Louisiana in 1850 was between $400 and $800. So on a $500 loan, the collateral was roughly one person. So if in 6 months' time, the planter has not paid back Canal Bank, they would come and take one of his slaves. The unanswered question about American history is, what were the banks then doing with those slaves? I will come back to that. We need to stay focused on the history of JPMorgan. This is so dense. By the way, $400 in 1850 is worth about $15,000 today. That is how much these banks valued human life. That's only one planter. All of these bills of exchange signed by all of these different people across the United States got bundled up together by the Canal Bank. And the bundle of everybody's debt was then passed on to Peabody and Morgan in New York. New York then repackages it as American bonds and sells it on to London savers to invest in. And every time Peabody and Morgan sold a bundle of American planter or household debt, they would get a commission of about 1% of the total value. This is the core business of these banks. Loans might not still be insured by the bodies of enslaved people, but the fundamental mechanism here has not changed in 150 years. In 1857, it was slave owner IOUs, but in 2007, it was subprime mortgages. What happens when European retirement investments rely on the collateralization of American debt?